and usually it makes it up on my website somewhere. So you'll have content after, right? So you don't have to worry about like taking notes and going back and forth and everything else. I'm Pete Giordano. I love working with startups. That's what I do kind of full time now. I work with startups that are in this kind of product market fit, but really helping them get to this, what I call go-to-market fit stage. Just a little bit about me so you know. So for 25 plus years, I've been in enterprise software, like Peach was saying. Big companies there, VMware, Accenture, and DoubleClick/Google, but it was Google's before my time. But one of the things I think that's different about me is I've held a role in almost every area in a software company, including back office roles, finance, IT. But I was an engineer from Michigan. I used to write software, then product management, product marketing. So I've played that role. And so I have a very different systems level thinking about companies that I think is just, it's unusual. It cost me in terms of career titles because, if you stay in one place and you keep going in the same direction with the same thing, you get the VP and then the senior VP and that was never for me. So I kind of sacrificed that for being more of a generalist. And so today I work with startups that are from some of these institutions that you see up here. I'm also proud to work with the Next 47 Accelerator, which is the joint venture between Siemens and Alchemist in Europe. And so I do kind of this thing, coaching and workshops there as well. My focus is go-to-market. Peach said I'm here for sales coach because I couldn't make the other day. Usually I'm doing more of the CEO coach, go-to-market coach, stuff like that. So don't hold that against me in the dating sessions. So thank you in advance for your feedback on the survey. Peach, I don't know if we shared the survey results back to everybody, but here's one slide from the survey. And the reason we did that is there's so much to cover in sales, right? In enterprise sales, and I've been dealing in enterprise business for almost 30 years now. But I wanted to kind of go deeper on something that would matter. And the predominant feedback in the survey was this idea of, we're doing B2B sales, how do we start to align stakeholders? So that's what we're going to talk about today. That's cool with everybody. Sounds good? Or were you signed up for demand gen marketing or something like that? Okay, cool. All right, so there's three key B2B sales challenges that I want to highlight. We're going to go into more depth. So first, you probably know this already, but you're dealing with around 6 to 10, the number's now 6.8 stakeholders for every deal. In fact, just to underscore that, typically in a B2B sale, and this is really larger company stuff, but it takes 4 signatures. So not only are you selling to this ideal customer profile or a buyer, but you also need to get all these signatures. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and I want to make this clear, the buying process is super complex, not the sales process. The sales process is easy. You own the sales process. You can make it whatever you want. That's the easy part. It's the customer buying process that is very complex. And here's kind of underscoring all of this, is unfortunately 83% of all of the buying jobs that are happening in your customer are happening without you being involved. The sales rep is involved for 17% of the buying process. So now, part of the 83%, they are consuming social media, they're consuming your content marketing, your white papers, and things like that. But it's not face-to-face time. It's not time that you're able to influence one-to-one that sale. So we're going to talk about why that matters. So how do you align stakeholders? Someone here, tell me what you've done in your past to kind of herd the cats. Yeah?
Well, you have to find an internal champion, first and foremost. That you mentioned that we can't always be there, so you have to find someone that is aligned with your vision and inside your company.
Cool. Is the champion the buyer?
Not usually from my experience. It's usually someone that is willing to go on your behalf and sell to the rest of the
Okay, nice. Yeah.
Identify the roles that people are playing and
Yep.
understand the underlying motivation. So, for example, if you might be replacing a system out there and someone is out, that was their baby and it was their pride and joy, you know that they're going to be underlying, whispering and saying things. And so even though they're not
I love
in the buying process, you actually have to step back and say, who could impact my
Yes.
close, and then understand where they are and either neutralize them or manage them. Or
I love
do something about it.
It's perfect. There was one more comment in the back.
I just had a question.
Oh.
I wanted to know what do you mean by stakeholder? Because
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, so a stakeholder is really anybody that cares about the purchase. Okay, so it doesn't matter what their company title is, their company role is, doesn't matter about what even their buying role is. All that really matters is that they are an individual that cares about some aspect of the purchase.
But are they inside the same agency? So they're
In the
the
company?
same segment and they're inside the same company.
Yeah, so stakeholder would be part of what we're going to call a buying group. I'll talk about that in a
She's
second.
selling to government.
You're selling to government. Good for you. But yeah, the same thing applies. So,
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, a lot of times it is unique in the sense that stakeholders, there might be the budget stakeholder and there might
Exactly.
be, like government definitely has a flavor that's
And
different to their.
I love that, Karen, and we're going to talk more about that. In fact, we're going to get down to how do you tease it apart and label and map, okay? So I want to give you a kind of what I think is a good formula. I've just done a lot of research. What I'm showing you here today, I mean, you can go out and you can go find a lot of this information online. I'm here to talk to you about like how I synthesize the information from my own experience and what I've read and researched from sources that I trust. So a lot of content from Gartner, from CEB, and so forth, right? But one of the first things is a concept. Who's heard of the concept of a buying job as part of the buying process? Okay, great, Karen. Okay. So we're going to talk about knowing your customers' buying jobs. Then we're going to talk about mapping the buying group, right? So all of the stakeholders that have some input or some say in the purchase, how do we map that out? And then finally, we're going to talk about identifying these conflicts between them, because in 100% of every one of your sales, there will be a priority and a conflict between two stakeholders or more in your purchase. And that is where so much of the sales friction happens. Okay, so first, let's talk about buying jobs. The first key point here that I want everyone to understand is that your sales process is not the customer's buying process, right? So I have like the generic funnel over here from top to bottom. It always works so perfectly. You fill the top of the funnel, and then at the bottom you close deals, and everything works like magic. This is about process. This is about hygiene, and it's about being able, the left side is about being able to do things like forecast, right? Just simple things like that that allow you to run your business. But that isn't selling. That is just running a process. The selling part comes into really managing your customer's buying process. So what do we mean by that? To get a little bit deeper here, there are 6 distinct buying jobs. We're going to go into each of these quickly. And what's more is that each of them are being run pretty much at the same time. And they're kind of executed as an individual job. And I don't have it on the slide here, but what's really important to note is that the sale happens when the customer has completed the buying jobs. And that's really important to know, is that it really has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with the customer feeling like they've completed all the jobs they have to do. And the jobs framework, by the way, it comes from the jobs to be done framework. Have you guys heard of that? Part of like Lean Start, right? Clayton Christensen and so forth? Okay, good. So and so here's a map. This is like an example of what a customer buying process might look like. So you have 4 of the 6 buying jobs in the orange that are in the middle. And then the stuff that's in bold, which might be hard to see on the screen, those are the validate and the consensus driving jobs. And those are kind of always on. But it is not a linear process. The buying process from the customer's point of view is, it is just all over the map. It is looping. It has repeats. It has fits and starts. Things end. They begin. New people enter into the process. and you have to get comfortable with this reality that you don't have control over their process. But what you do want to do is learn how they buy and what their jobs are. So what I'm trying to do today is just give you a simple framework so that you can start to dissect your customers' buying jobs. I can't give you the answer for your own company, but I can give you this framework that helps you ask a few questions that then gives you some insight into how to run the process. So job number one, or one of the jobs, is this idea of problem identification. This is really important because you're trying to sell a solution, and what there's one thing that matters in terms of this problem identification. They need to have urgency around what you're trying to solve. And if they have not identified that they have this problem, you have an entirely different set of issues. They have to get educated, and somehow, some way, they need to become aware that they actually have a problem. And then not only that, but in companies that you're selling to, they have competing priorities. What you're trying to sell to them better be priority number attached to priority 1 or priority 2, because priority 3 is not getting funded. It's just not. So you've got to be thinking that, how do I attach what I'm selling to one of the top 2 strategic initiatives at my customer? Okay? So problem identification is what it is. It's about, we have a problem. It's usually a champion or someone that says, I think we need to solve a problem here. Okay? And at the beginning, they start thinking about what's the cost benefit there. Second job is this idea of solution exploration. This is where you start getting a little bit serious. You do some web searches, you start looking at alternatives. What's really important in this situation is people start thinking, how would it look in my environment? Every company is a precious snowflake. They are unique. They're delicate. There's no other company like them in the world, right? Whether or not that's true, that's how you have to encounter the customer. And you have to be thinking about, how do I make it real in their environment very, very quickly? Job number 3, requirements building. These probably seem like pretty normal, like they probably seem very obvious, right? So this is about, what do we actually need to do in order to purchase? This is where they start thinking about identifying criteria. Again, customers are always looking at, what information have we overlooked, right? They're always in this information gathering phase. They're attending events. They're doing research online. They're reading industry analyst reports. And so what's happening is they're starting to stack up. It's like a snowplow effect of information. And while this is good because you think getting the more information is good, the bad news is it leads to a problem later down the road we're going to talk about. This also here, requirements, this is so critical. This is where they start to prioritize trade-offs. They start to say, well, if we do it there's a lot of ways, 9 ways to skin a cat, right? Like, there's a lot of ways to solve a problem. Internally, they're having debates about how to do it. And for better or worse, I think that there are rational debates that happen inside of companies that get down to just thinking about IRR, and it's all about fact. But then sometimes, and you have to be aware whether or not you're selling in this environment, there are what I call religious battles. There's literally just a philosophical difference about how to do something, and it may be based on some loose facts or some experiences from one person versus another, and that's a conflict that is going to rear its head in the sales process. So then we have this supplier selection job. This is where we've taken a look, we've started to evaluate kind of what are the alternative ways we can solve this problem, and now we start comparing solutions. There's also an evaluation of alternatives, but again, you're seeing this repeat, trade-off prioritization. So about 2 jobs ago, this idea of prioritizing trade-offs, crept into the buying jobs, and it stays with them. Customers are always thinking about trading off different solutions or trading off different projects inside their own company. So this is one of the always-on jobs. This is the validation one. And the reason I've highlighted these 3 bullets in orange is because this is part of the 17% of the time that you spend kind of face-to-face with your customer. This is a couple of the areas that you can actually affect, right? So validating their claims, providing them with references, user feedback, helping them get in touch with third-party reviews, and so forth. And this one here, consensus, I would say, is also an always-on. Think about it. When we talked about a champion coming up with an idea, what are they doing? They're running around the organization trying to find people that share the same urgency and viewpoint perspective on the problem they want to solve, right? And so they internally are trying to build consensus, but again, almost everything on this, right, where there's educating additional stakeholders that are outside of the core buying group, building a shared understanding across the different ones, and then being there to literally encourage debate within your customer. Sounds crazy. But you want to bring them to the table and encourage discourse and debate and bring the ideas. And then, obviously, the business case piece and securing budget, we'll get to that. Okay, so let me pause there. So questions on the buying groups, those sound pretty logical. So again, you'll get this material later, and what I highly recommend about the buying groups is take a look at each one of those and then put your product in its place and say, and just start with the ideal customer profile, the person you think is your user and the person who you think is your buyer. Just start there and just start asking the questions. So I thought of maybe an interesting way, well, how would you go about and map your buying group? How would you figure out, right, like who are all the people that care? So many times in enterprise sales, you're moving down, you've got your champion, they're all interested, you get to a meeting, you do the next meeting, you do the demo, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, well, I've got to have you talk to legal. I've got to have you talk to IT. The VP of operations wants to speak with you. And you're like, why didn't you tell me that before? Why, if that was going to happen, you kind of knew that was going to go on. Wouldn't that have been helpful to know kind of way earlier in the process, right? So what I would argue and what I would propose to you all is, given that the hard research has been done and that we know that these are the 6 buying jobs, use that and take what the customer's trying to do in each job and flip it into a question for the key contact that you have. And then from that, build out your network. So let's talk about that. So we said before, you're selling to a buying group of between 6 and 10 people. Right now, the number is around 6.8. That was like 2017 data. 2015 data, it was 5.4 people. It's just going like this. And the buying group is the set of people that have company roles, right? Yes, they might be executive, office, and so forth, but these are also the titles, right? I can't forget about that. Maybe it's the VP of Ops, the Director of Finance, like whatever your target segment, target customer profile is, that would be in this company role, all right? I think the one that is really important to note here is this idea of an end user. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but this end user, it might be the buyer and it might not be, and that's an important part of your sales model. Now, what's different and utterly separate from the title of the person you're trying to sell to and the role that they have in the company is what their buying persona is. So what role, like Karen was mentioning, what role are they playing? Are they a champion? Are they a budget holder, a gatekeeper? Are they actually an influencer in the entire process? Are they a blocker? Could they be someone that can't say yes, but they can say no because of regulatory compliance, government down there? So the way to think about it is each contact that you have has both their role in the company, a title, and they have this buying persona. And you need to map that out for each of your contacts. HubSpot, which is a marketing automation software, they've done some research and they found that, maybe it was one of their plugins. Anyway, they found out that on average, and they've got tens of thousands of customers, so this is like statistically significant. They found that on average, each sale has about 8 contacts that they're working, right? So that 6.8 number might even be low. So how do we start in a place that we think is simple, right? So that we can start the mapping. You got to start somewhere. And what I propose is you start with your ICP. Is that something that we talk about at Alchemist, ICP? Ideal Customer Profile? I thought kind of everybody knows like that is an acronym, but whatever. That's what that means. And this is the important bit. Start with your user and your buyer. And the reason I use them separately is because sometimes your user and your buyer are the same person. Who has that situation here? Tell me about your user and buyer being the same person.
So what we do is artificial intelligence for construction and mining. So the buyer could be the owner or a body within the enterprise, but the user would typically be an operator or a project manager within a site.
Okay.
So,
But to me, that means that they're a different person.
they are.
Oh, okay. So I was asking for
Same.
who here is selling software where the user and the buyer is the same person. I'll give you a hint. So a good example of this would be like Zoom, right? That's enterprise software, but a person, anybody, can swipe a credit card and now become a customer. And they're also the user. And then all of a sudden it starts to, Slack is the same way, right? Who here has a product like that? Probably, okay, you've got a product like that where the person that you're, see now, you have a lot of advantages. Even though you're selling to government, you have a lot of advantages because you can do things with that sales model that what I'm going to show you here in these next two, you can't do, or it's much more difficult. So the second condition that can happen is this, where the buyer and the user are two different people, but they're in the same budget center. That might be what your situation is. VP of Ops buys it, the operators use it, right? That actually makes it a little bit easier because the person that's making this buying decision obviously wants to invest in their own group. They have a budget, potentially, right, that they're able to direct and so forth. Who else here has this situation where the person that is the user of the product is different from the person writing the check, but they're in the same group? Okay? Tell me, how do you think of your product? I can't read your name from here. Jim? David? David.
We do price optimization for grocery chains, for supermarkets, and the buyer is usually marketing department. So CMO is the buyer who owns the budget, and the user is pricing manager.
There you go.
Who usually belongs to marketing department.
Great. Perfect. It's another great example where you have multiple points of entry because you can entice the user because it's going to make their life easier, and then have them help you get to the buyer, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
So that model again. So we're kind of increasing here in friction. So this is the third model. This is one of the more difficult ones. So this is when your user and your buyer are different people, and they are not in the same budget center. They're not in the same group. Anybody in that situation? Okay, I'm sorry for you guys. What? No, I'm only kidding about that. It's just it's different, and it means you have to have different tactics. And I'll be honest. In general, I don't like talking in like absolutes here. In general, it can be a more costly sale. Okay, so Karen, why don't you tell us about your situation where there are different people and they're in totally different budget areas?
So we sell computer vision software
Okay.
to retail.
Yep.
And the users are typically in the merchandise/store area.
Yep.
And the question really is driven is the budget coming out of IT, or is
There you go.
the budget coming out of the, and it honestly has to do with how organizations are structured, because where did analytics fall into
Right.
it? And so what you actually have to do is figure out up front, is it, where you just don't know, because
You
it
don't
could be the same, or IT controls it. And then you have to also manage IT running it versus the user, and then they're not happy
There you go.
because there's conflicting
Yeah, and I'll tell you, there's another one on here that I don't have on here, which is there are there are areas where you need to get budget from multiple budget centers, and that alignment that can be really tricky as well. And the thing to realize here is that as you move from left to right on this, it's just increasing your sales friction. It's not good or bad. It's not wrong or right. You've just chosen to sell a product and a user that requires a certain sales model. So you just got to deal with it. That's the situation. Yep.
But I guess also that can be a matter of strategy. Because
I think it's all strategy.
Because I see how the same product can be packaged in a way where you go left and right. For example, the
Yes.
thing that you're telling me, I have a case where a government user with a credit card, as long as it's a spend of under $200, they are the user and the buyer.
There you go.
And then there are cases where it's a $10,000 purchase and he or she needs approval from their boss, so it goes
That's
to
it.
the right. But then the question is, so the core model there for me would be what happens when you have all of the models inside an organization.
Well, again, I think part of what you have to deal with is where are you right now? Because as a startup, limited resources, it's almost impossible to execute on all of these models all at once. So what you want to do is figure out where are you right now? Like, okay, so I gave you the example of Zoom, but that's kind of a trick question, right? Because Zoom's real model is, let me get some people on the system and then let me go do an enterprise deal later. So they do the model on the left first, and then they move to the right. And that is a popular strategy. That, to me, is when I think consumerization of IT, it's more about the sales model is that of a consumer model where your user and buyer is the same, but then you can do an enterprise deal to offer enterprise admin, management, controls, security, all these other things that would come with an enterprise sale that would be more on the right-hand side of this, right? So part of your product strategy is how, right? That's the product strategy is how, is it possible for me to get a situation where I can have my first user be the buyer also? There are cases where it just doesn't happen, right? But it is a matter of strategy. Okay. All right. One thing, not going to spend a lot of time on this. If you're selling to a back office, so if you're selling legal software, finance software, then they're in the right. But most of the time it's like back office. But the reality is that let's say that you're not. Let's say you're selling engineering software, you're selling marketing or line of business software, right? All this other stuff doesn't matter. In today's world, back office groups like these are having an increasing impact in sales. In fact, one of the pieces of research I did said that their involvement just over the last 3 years, and then they move you through, they have a early kind of chopped off a lot of branches on the decision tree because there's just certain things you just kind of have to go along, right? So what I would not worry about too much is how do I do all of these or how do I get to the simplest model is what problem am I trying to solve, who's the buyer, who's the user, and what's the right sales model to get to them, and you have to iterate on that. I want to keep moving. Questions? Okay, so we're going to use buying job questions. So we're going to invert buying jobs, and we're going to turn them into questions to help you map who is a stakeholder. Now, when we're doing this, part of what you have to have kind of on like the other cores of the processor in your brain is the priorities, right? There's this kind of constant question or observance. You need to almost like you're talking to your contact, and you need to at every moment be thinking about what their priorities are, how are they the same as other people you're talking to, how are they different. This is the number one thing to take away from today is that individuals, companies don't buy software, people buy software. Right? And so it's the people that have to get their stuff together and get consensus. And so your job is to identify all the conflicts way ahead of time. And not only that, you need to be way ahead of the customer and know that they're going to run into that conflict. So I'll run through these pretty quickly because I think they're somewhat obvious. But like for problem identification, when you start with your, let's say you're starting with a user, you get in contact with someone at an account, just ask them, hey, who else thinks this is an urgent problem? And they say, no one, we don't even know if it's urgent. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a problem, right? So the way you phrase your questions is really important because I see this, I work with a lot of startups, and one of the number one problems they run into is that they're super passionate about a problem. It's just not urgent for the customer. So who else shares urgency? Who else do you know that thinks it's an urgent problem? Who else in the organization would be involved in determining whether we should do it or not? Make it simple. Like you don't have to say ROI or TCO or anything like that or cost benefit. Just who else is going to be interested in figuring out the business case for that? They're going to give you a name. Would you mind introducing me to that person? Yeah, sure. I'd love to have you. Great. So now you've found another individual that might be involved and obviously is a stakeholder. And guess what? When you're talking to this next person, you're going to want to ask them the same questions. You have to ask every single person all of these questions so you can ferret out all of the other people that you need to deal with and map. So example, first, for customers that are trying to complete the solution exploration, it's like, well, if you came up with this idea and you guys agreed it's a problem, who else is thinking about alternatives? Maybe they want to build something in-house. Oh, okay, let me talk to Jane in IT because they wanted to build their own computer vision system. They think that they have, even though they're a retail company, they think that they should be in the, AI business, right? So asking these simple questions helps you uncover this. Who else, what is it? Oh, here's a good one, right? Not only is there someone out there thinking about alternative solutions, but who would be involved trying to figure out what it would look like in your environment? How do we make it real for you? Who would want to see it operating with users? Right? Super important question, because that person is going to be a potential blocker. If they're in there and they're like, yeah, you know what, I don't want my users to be touched by this, then now your whole deal is now stalled. So you want to identify, right, simple question, who else is involved, and then this one is really good, right? Is anybody prioritizing requirements yet? If so, who are they? Requirements building, pretty straightforward, right? Who else is involved? I mean, it's the same question over and over and over again. Who else is? And then just think about the buying job. But what I urge you to do is I've given you a framework. I want you to take your product, your offering, and I want to add 1 or 2 levels of context and flavor to it. So you can be a little more context sensitive, right? So you can add that level of color commentary when you're asking this person the question. This is a great one. Assume there's going to be a bake-off. You know what that means? You guys familiar with that term? That was kind of one from the old days. But a bake-off is they're going to bring in competitive products and they're going to try them out side by side and they're going to see which one wins. Okay? Assume that's going to happen. It might not, but assume it. And a lot of times there's another person that's going to come into the fray that's going to be, I'm running the bake-off. And all of a sudden you've got another stakeholder that has some influence over your sale. Right? Validation. Again, these get somewhat repetitive, but this is important. Was someone assigned to go out and get references? Who are they? Can I talk to them? A lot of times they'll say, Jim, you're part of this committee or whatever, or let's say I'm the VP of Ops, and Jim is a junior ops person just on the job for a month. Jim, listen, we're thinking about these software solutions. Do a Google search on AI for mining, and let me know what you find. Jim, all of a sudden, this junior level person who's been around the company for a month now has an enormous impact in the information flow that's coming into your account without you being involved. So you want to know who's doing the research, who else is looking at alternative solutions. When the bake-off thing happens, there's going to be someone that declares a winner. The person running the bake-off may not have authority to actually say who's winning. They might say, we're going to let our users decide, or we're going to let the frontline manager decide, or so on and so forth. So again, I know I probably sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but you've got to ask these precise questions to tease these things apart, because your customer isn't thinking about it the way you are. They're just thinking about, we're trying to solve a problem, I got a tidal wave of information coming at me, I don't know how to separate the relevant from irrelevant, and really all I need you to do is stay out of my way, and I need to go talk to a bunch of people inside my company to make sure that we're all, like, that's kind of what's going on through their head. Unless you have something that's like, number one, strategic importance, like they are replacing their entire financial system, then there's this top-down priority, and it's a lot easier to get access to people. And then the consensus piece. This is, again, I think these last two, validation and consensus, this is where you have 17% of the buying process involves someone from your team, right? 83% is happening with your customer without you really having a face-to-face. So I would say like 90% of your effort is in the last two jobs, right? Really trying to drive the consensus and the validation, because it's what you actually have more control over. Think about the things that are on this slide, right? Like you can coach them in the beginning to say, look, at one point we're going to have to come together and talk about requirements. Who's going to be involved in that? Who is going to build the business case for this? And by the way, the person that builds the business case often is different from the person that actually has to go secure the budget. Does that make sense? Like someone might be charged with putting an Excel model together, right? So now all of a sudden you have another person that you don't know of. They're making a ton of assumptions about cost, about their internal data, about how they're going to utilize the software, about what parts of their business it impacts. They're building this entire model, and like you haven't even talked to them yet. Like, don't you want to help influence them, or at least collaborate with them to be there as an information provider, right? Okay, I got the 5-minute mark here. We started 15 minutes late.
But we have another session
All right.
that you're a part of.
So one thing I'll shoot up here. What's that?
Another session that you're a part of. So.
Oh, right. I got to be there too. That's right. So I put this little diagram. This is one from, I think it was Org Chart Hub I put here. But there are tools you can use, and you guys have mostly seen these tools, but they all share kind of something in common. And that is like the ones on the left, these are all for like sending documents. Well, they all have a nifty feature that when you send a document to Jennifer at company.com, when she forwards it to someone else, you now know you have that email. So you can, without being too creepy, you can call Jennifer and say, hey, I noticed you forwarded it to Al. I was wondering if you might make an introduction for me. I'd love to, meet and understand, right? HubSpot with this plugin, Org Chart Hub. I'm not a HubSpot huge fan, but I just thought this was interesting. They have this plugin that lets you do a visual map, and it shows you both the person, it shows you their company title, but also their buying role, influencer, champion, right, and so forth. So I thought that was interesting. I'm a very visual guy. I like that. Some of you might want to just use a spreadsheet. And then on the right-hand side are sales enablement tools that do something similar. So they have content. So let's say you want to send a customer reference or a customer story. When you do that in HighSpot, if that person then invites somebody else to look at it, now you have another contact. And you can go and say, oh, I'd love to meet that person. I'd love to understand their role in the process, and so forth. Don't worry. All this stuff you're going to get all. Don't worry.
If you ever find it time.
Okay. So how are you going to use your 17% of your time to drive a sale? And the way you're going to use it is you're going to identify priorities. You're going to reduce conflicts within your customer. And you're going to drive consensus. And I got to get through this quickly. So even though you have these 6 buying jobs, right, that are happening at the same time in a very messy spaghetti bowl kind of looking thing, there is an arc to the story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I would persuade you to take a look at this as a map of where you should start. Okay? So early in the buying process, there are going to be information challenges. Remember we talked about people going out and doing all the research? They're going to find so much information. Well, first of all, they're going to keep looking for information, and then all of a sudden they're going to wake up one day and they're going to be like, we have way too many documents. We've clipped too many Evernote notes. We've printed out too many things. How do we even process this to make sense of it all, right? So be thinking about that as a sales professional, about how can I help them cut through the clutter to get them to the thing that they need. And you can only do that if you know how they're motivated, if you know what their priorities are. Then you can sift away all of your generic content and you can say, look, I'm going to send you this customer story, but I'm going to highlight these 2 paragraphs. It's what you need to know. That's an example.